In the heart of old New Orleans, a woman of impossible beauty was sold, but this was no ordinary transaction. It was the beginning of a conspiracy that would shatter a city's most powerful dynasty. She was known as the Pearl, and her true identity was a secret worth killing for, a secret buried in a hidden room for over a century, waiting to reveal a truth more terrifying than any ghost story. Step into the shadows of a city built on secrets, where the line between beauty and terror is as thin as a whisper. Before we unlock this mystery, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what is the exact time this story finds you? We are tracing the reach of these documented accounts, mapping the moments you choose to step into this forgotten past. The autumn of 1837 saw the St. Louis Hotel in New Orleans overflowing with the city's elite, its wealthiest men gathered in a fever of anticipation. Even for a city notorious as the largest slave market in the United States, the auction that evening had drawn an unusual, electric level of interest. What set this night apart was not the number of souls on the block, but the presence of a single woman, a figure who would soon be known throughout the cobblestone streets of the French Quarter simply as the Pearl, a name that would echo for decades. She stood 5 feet and 4 inches, her skin described in the auction papers as the color of fresh cream touched by the faintest hint of coffee. Her eyes, a deep and shifting amber, seemed to capture the very light in the room, and her hair fell in long, glossy black waves down her back. The auctioneer, a man called Thomas Williams, presented her with a simple, chilling designation, lot number 17. But the crowd needed no introduction, they knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, as whispers moved through them like currents on the mighty Mississippi. The bidding opened at a staggering sum, 5 times the price of a common house servant. What would unfold next would become one of the most peculiar and darkly fascinating chapters in the history of New Orleans, a city already infamous for its brutal racial hierarchy and the grim economics of human bondage. This single night would connect powerful families, unearth buried secrets, and eventually trigger a series of disappearances that would remain utterly unexplained until 1962. It was then that a renovation of the old Deloqua mansion on Royal Street tore open a hidden room, revealing a leather-bound journal, 3 human finger bones, and a portrait of a woman whose beauty, even captured in fading paint, seemed not quite of this world. This is the story of Eleanora Reynolds, known to history as the Pearl, and the terrifying truth behind her disappearance in the winter of 1842. That fateful night in 1837 was witnessed by many, including James Thornton, a northern businessman visiting to establish cotton trade connections. In his personal diary, recovered from his Boston estate in 1952, Thornton described the scene with palpable unease. "I have never witnessed such a frenzy among gentlemen of standing. The woman on sale was remarkable, yes, but their behavior was driven by something beyond the acquisition of property. One could detect a religious fervor in their bidding, as if possessing this particular soul held a significance that transcended the material realm." What Thornton could not have known was the intricate web of history already ensnaring the woman on the block. Eleanora Reynolds had not been born into slavery, nor had she arrived through the common channels of the domestic trade. According to ship records from the port of New Orleans, she had disembarked just 3 weeks earlier aboard the Augusta, listed not as cargo, but as a passenger accompanying a merchant named Marcus Bennett. But by the time the Augusta docked, Bennett was dead, supposedly from a fever contracted in Havana. With no free papers found among his effects, Eleanora was seized by port authorities and consigned to the auction block. This much was public record. What remained hidden until the discovery of the Deloqua journal was why a woman of such obvious refinement and education found herself in such a predicament, and why certain New Orleans families took such a terrifying interest in ensuring she would never, ever leave the city. To grasp the full weight of the events that winter, we must first understand the New Orleans of 1837. The city was a complex mosaic of cultures, economies, and racial classifications, more elaborate than anywhere else in America. After the Louisiana Purchase, it had transformed from a French and Spanish colonial outpost into a booming American port, where colossal fortunes were forged in cotton, sugar, and human flesh. New Orleans had cultivated a 3-tiered racial system, a world away from the strict black and white divisions elsewhere in the South. Between these poles existed the gens de couleur libres, free people of color, many of whom were wealthy property owners, some of whom owned slaves themselves. It was a city of stark contradictions. Brutal slave markets operated within sight of grand opera houses. The Code Noir supposedly regulated slave treatment, while the infamous quadroon balls facilitated arrangements between white men and free women of color. Above all, it was a city where appearance and bloodlines carried immense, life-altering power, where the difference between freedom and bondage could hinge on a single, forgotten ancestor, a fact that would prove to be the very heart of Eleanora Reynolds' story. The winning bid that night came from Charles Deloqua, a sugar planter whose family roots in Louisiana stretched back to the earliest French colonial days. Deloqua paid the unprecedented sum of $7,000, enough to purchase an entire plantation of field workers, for a woman who, by all accounts, had no experience with domestic service or hard labor. The transaction was recorded by notary William Patterson, whose ledger noted something deeply unusual. Deloqua insisted the bill of sale describe Eleanora not as a slave, but as a ward, to be housed in his Royal Street residence. What transpired after Eleanora was taken to the Deloqua home remained shrouded in conflicting testimony. Household staff, interviewed decades later by a journalist from the Daily Picayune, recalled that she was treated not as a servant, but as a guest, given a private room in the family quarters and provided with clothing befitting a society woman. Yet, she was never seen leaving the property. Visitors reported that Deloqua introduced her as his distant cousin from France, who spoke little English. According to household records, Deloqua's wife, Isabel, departed for her family home in Natchez a mere 2 weeks after Eleanora's arrival, taking their 3 children with her. She would not return for nearly 6 months. During this period, Charles Deloqua sealed his Royal Street house to all visitors, conducting his business entirely through written correspondence delivered by his private secretary. The mystery deepened in January of 1838, when Dr. Samuel Lawrence was summoned to the Deloqua home to attend to Eleanora, who suffered from a persistent cough. Dr. Lawrence's medical journal, preserved in the archives of Tulane University, contained a telling entry, called to attend a young woman at the Deloqua residence. Patient exhibits symptoms consistent with consumption, though her constitution appears sound. More troubling is the evident distress in her manner. When alone, she asked if I knew of her true circumstances before her arrival. Before I could respond, Deloqua returned, and she fell silent. Dr. Lawrence prescribed bed rest and tonics but recorded his impression that the lady's ailment seemed as much of the spirit as of the body. He was never called back. By spring, rumors had begun to slither through New Orleans society about the mysterious beauty in the Deloqua mansion. Some claimed she was Charles Deloqua's illegitimate daughter, others, his foreign mistress. The most persistent whisper, however, connected her to the Villars family, one of the oldest and most secretive lineages in Louisiana, whose patriarch, Henri Villars, had been among the most aggressive bidders at the auction before Deloqua's winning offer. The Villars family had built their fortune in the colony's earliest days, controlling vast sugar plantations and, according to local legend, engaging in privateering during the War of 1812. By 1837, they had largely withdrawn from public life, maintaining their estate on the city's outskirts and rarely appearing at society functions. What possible link could they have to a young woman newly arrived from Havana? This question would hang in the air, unanswered, for more than a century. The Deloqua Journal, discovered in 1962, provided the first chilling insight into Eleanora's life within the mansion's walls. Written in a precise, educated hand, it began in February 1838. The early entries were mundane, notes on weather, books, and meals. But as winter thawed into spring, the writings grew more revealing. March 11, 1838, he has agreed to allow me access to the family library, though I am still forbidden from venturing beyond the inner courtyard. When I asked why I must remain hidden, he said only it was for my protection. From what, he will not say. I begin to fear his story about my papers being processed is a fiction to keep me compliant. April 23, 1838. Today, C brought a visitor, an elderly man named Villars, who stared at me with an intensity that felt as if he were searching for something in my very features. They spoke in French, believing I could not understand, about the resemblance and the bloodline. When I later asked Seek about this, he became agitated and reminded me of my precarious position, that without free papers, I remained legally his property, regardless of my true history. The journal entries became increasingly distressed as Eleanora realized Deloqua had no intention of securing her freedom as he had initially promised. By summer, she was plotting an escape. July 17, 1838, I have made contact with a housemaid who has agreed to deliver a message to the offices of the American consul. If my mother's story was true, my birth in Philadelphia should establish my free status. I must act quickly, before he makes good on his threat to send me to his plantation if I continue to cause difficulties. The next entry, dated August 2nd, contained a single, devastating line: "It was a trap." The maid informed him of my plan. "I am to be moved tomorrow." The journal then fell silent for nearly a month. When entries resumed in September, Eleanora was writing from Bow Refuge, the Deloqua sugar plantation 50 miles downriver from New Orleans. Her situation had clearly deteriorated. September 5, 1838, I am kept in the former overseer's house, separate from both the main residence and the slave quarters. A woman named Martha has been assigned to attend to me, though I suspect her primary role is to report my every action to the plantation manager. I have seen C only once since my arrival, when he came to inform me that any further attempts to contact outside authorities would result in my being reclassified as a field worker. The meaning was clear. It was at Bow Refuge that Eleanora's story intersected with another mysterious figure, Joseph Miller, a northern abolitionist who had infiltrated Louisiana society, posing as a doctor interested in treating slave ailments. Miller's coded correspondence with anti-slavery activists in Boston, decoded and published in 1949, made reference to a woman of unusual circumstance held at the Deloqua plantation who claims to have been born free in Philadelphia to a free mother. Miller apparently managed to speak with Eleanora briefly in October 1838. He wrote, "The subject has reason to believe her imprisonment is connected not to ordinary human trafficking, but to some matter of inheritance and identity that threatens powerful interests in this region. She begs assistance in contacting authorities in Philadelphia who might have record of her birth and parentage." Miller promised to investigate, but his work in Louisiana ended abruptly in November 1838 when his true purpose was discovered. He narrowly escaped the state with his life, and there is no record he ever pursued Eleanora's case further. Eleanora's journal entries from Bow Refuge grew infrequent through the winter of 1838 into 1839. She recorded observations of plantation life, her failed attempts to secure aid, and her growing suspicion that her confinement served a purpose beyond mere ownership. December 12, 1838, I overheard the plantation manager speaking with a visitor about the Villars inheritance and the problem of verification. When they realized I was within earshot, they fell silent. Later, I asked Martha if she knew anything about the Villars family. She grew pale and refused to speak, saying only that they were not people to be trifled with. What connection could I possibly have to them? The mystery deepened in February 1839 when, according to the journal, Eleanora received an unexpected visitor, Henri Villars himself, now quite elderly, who came to Bow Refuge without Deloqua's knowledge. February 26, 1839, the old man came alone, dismissing Martha from the house. He asked about my mother, specifically whether she had possessed a gold locket with an engraving of a ship. When I confirmed she had worn such a piece until her death, he nodded as if a truth had been confirmed. He then asked if I knew the circumstances of my father's death. I told him what my mother had always said, that he was a French merchant who died at sea before my birth. At this, the old man made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Your mother was a prudent woman," he said, "but perhaps too prudent for your own good." He left without explaining, promising to return, though I am not certain whether to hope for or dread such a visit. Henri Villars never did return to Bow Refuge. 3 days after his visit to Eleanora, he was found dead in his study, apparently from natural causes. His death, however, triggered a complex legal battle over the substantial Villars estate, as he had died without a male heir. His nearest relative, a nephew named Louis Villars, immediately filed to claim the inheritance. It was during this dispute that the connection between Eleanora and the Villars family began to emerge in the pages of her increasingly fragmented journal. April 9, 1839, C. arrived in a state of great agitation, demanding to know exactly what the old man had said to me. When I related our conversation, he became even more disturbed. Did he mention any documents? He asked repeatedly. Any papers he might have given your mother? I told him truthfully he had not. C then searched my room thoroughly before leaving, taking with him my mother's Bible, the only possession I had kept from Philadelphia. Within its pages were my mother's few letters and papers, including my certificate of birth. I have now lost the only proof of who I truly am. The journal's final entry suggests Eleanora had pieced together the terrifying truth of her situation. June 17, 1839, I now understand why I was brought here. It was never about my value as property, but about preventing me from claiming what might rightfully be mine. My mother once told me my father's family had rejected her, but she never explained why. If what I now suspect is true, then my father was not simply a French merchant, but a Villars, perhaps even Unri's son. And if documentation of such a connection exists, it would explain C.'s desperate efforts to keep me hidden and classified as a slave, rather than a potential claimant to one of the largest fortunes in Louisiana. This theory aligned with long-circulated rumors about Henri Villars' estranged son, John Baptiste, who had allegedly formed a relationship with a free woman of color in Philadelphia in the early 1800s. According to these whispers, John Baptiste had been disowned by his father but may have secretly married the woman before his death at sea in 1817, the year of Eleanora's birth. If Eleanora was indeed John Baptiste's legitimate daughter, and if proof of the marriage existed, she would have had a powerful claim to the Villars' inheritance under French laws that still influenced Louisiana's unique legal code. Such a claim would have been both unprecedented and scandalous, recognizing a woman with African ancestry as the rightful heir to a prestigious white family's fortune. The final dated entry in Eleanora's journal was from September 3, 1839. She wrote, "I have found a way. The riverboat stops here tomorrow to take on sugar. Martha has agreed to help me in exchange for the pearl earrings Mother left me. If all goes well, I will be in New Orleans by nightfall, and from there, I can seek passage north. I must find those papers before it is too late." The journal ends there, leaving historians to piece together subsequent events from other sources. According to Beau Refuge plantation records, a female slave matching Eleanora's description was reported missing on September 4, 1839. A substantial reward was offered, but the primary search focused on riverboats heading north. Instead, evidence suggests Eleanora made her way back to New Orleans, perhaps intending to search the Deloqua townhouse for her mother's papers. A receipt from a French Quarter apothecary dated September 7, 1839, shows the purchase of women's toiletries charged to the account of Marie Laveau, the famous voodoo priestess known to sometimes shelter fugitives. For almost 3 years, Eleanora Reynolds vanished from all records. The Villars inheritance case proceeded, with Louis Villars ultimately confirmed as the rightful heir in 1841 after no other claimants came forward. Charles Deloqua, after an initial aggressive search, appeared to abandon the pursuit, focusing on his mounting financial troubles. Then, in January 1842, Eleanora Reynolds reappeared in New Orleans society in a manner that shocked the city. She attended the annual Mardi Gras ball at the St. Louis Hotel, the very building where she had been sold 5 years earlier, not as a slave, but as the elegantly attired companion of Louis Villars. Witnesses described the sensation. The society columnist for the Daily Picayune wrote, "The mysterious beauty on the arm of Monsieur Villars caused all conversation to cease momentarily. She was adorned in a gown of midnight blue silk that emphasized her extraordinary complexion. Those who had attended certain transactions at the same venue some years prior exchanged significant glances, though none dared make explicit reference. The nature of their arrangement remains uncertain. Some historians suggest Louis secretly purchased her freedom, others propose Eleanora had obtained leverage over him through the discovery of documents. Their public appearance together represented an unprecedented breach of social boundaries. Charles Deloqua was also at the ball. Multiple accounts describe him growing visibly distressed upon seeing Eleanora with Louis Villars, attempting to approach them before being physically restrained by friends. He left shortly thereafter. 3 days later, he filed a legal complaint claiming Louis Villars had unlawfully taken possession of his human property. The complaint was quietly withdrawn within 24 hours. On February 12, 1842, Eleanora and Louis Villars were seen boarding a steamship bound for France. Passenger manifests listed them as Mr. Louis Villars and ward. They left behind a city ablaze with speculation. They would never return to American soil. And here, the documented history might have ended, were it not for the events that unfolded at the Deloqua mansion 2 weeks after their departure. On February 27, 1842, neighbors reported unusual activity at the Royal Street residence. Lights burned through the night, servants were seen carrying large trunks to waiting carriages. By morning, the house stood empty. When creditors arrived days later, they found it abandoned, yet not in haste. Clothes remained in wardrobes, books on shelves, food in the pantry, as if the occupants expected to return. Charles Deloqua, his wife Isabel, and their 3 children had vanished. Assumptions they had fled creditors gave way to more sinister theories when, in March 1842, the bodies of 2 men were discovered in a swamp outside the city. They were identified as Deloqua's private secretary and his plantation manager from Bow Refuge. Both had been killed by a single gunshot to the head, execution style. A police investigation yielded few results. The detective in charge, James Morrison, noted in his report that individuals connected to this case seem remarkably reluctant to provide information, suggesting forces beyond ordinary criminal matters may be involved. The investigation was suspended in June 1842. For over a century, the Deloqua disappearance remained one of New Orleans' most enduring mysteries. Then, in 1962, the renovation of the long-vacant mansion uncovered the hidden room containing Eleanora's journal, the finger bones, and the portrait. The journal provided crucial insights but ended before her reappearance. The finger bones, examined in 1964, were determined to belong to a male who had died approximately 120 years earlier. Decades later, DNA testing was inconclusive. It was the portrait that offered the most tantalizing clue. The painting, executed in the style of the period, showed Eleanora Reynolds in an elegant blue gown. But an X-ray examination in 1975 revealed another image beneath, a family portrait of a man, woman, and young girl. Art historians identified the hidden subjects as John Baptiste Villars, his wife, and their infant daughter. This strongly supported the theory that Eleanora was indeed John Baptiste's legitimate daughter. But why was this evidence hidden in the Deloqua house? A partial answer emerged in 1982 when a collection of letters was discovered among the Villars family papers. Exchanged between Louis Villars and an unnamed correspondent in Paris between 1841 and 1842, they suggested a complex scenario. In one letter dated December 1841, Louis wrote, "The arrangement is proceeding. I have made contact with the subject and explained our mutual interest in resolving this matter quietly. She is understandably suspicious but sees the logic in cooperation. D remains the primary obstacle. His financial entanglements with my late uncle make him resistant to any settlement that might expose their previous dealings." A subsequent letter from January 1842 stated, "The documents have been verified. There can be no doubt as to their authenticity." Had these papers come to light during the inheritance proceedings, the outcome would have been quite different. Our present arrangement satisfies all parties. She gains her freedom and a settlement, the family avoids scandal. D alone remains unpacified, but I believe his economic circumstances will eventually compel his cooperation. These cryptic messages suggested Louis had discovered proof of Eleanora's legitimate claim but offered a private settlement, freedom and money in exchange for her silence. This protected the Villars' reputation while liberating Eleanora. But Charles Deloqua, having paid a fortune for her and perhaps privy to financial irregularities, was excluded from the arrangement. The letters imply he posed an ongoing threat. The final letter, dated February 1842, shortly before the Deloqua disappearance, contained a brief message: "The problem has resolved itself in a most unexpected manner. I believe no further action will be required. We sail as planned on the 12th. What exactly transpired in those early February days of 1842? Historians have constructed a plausible sequence. Upon seeing Eleanora at the ball, a desperate Deloqua may have attempted blackmail. Louis and Eleanora, preparing for France, would have had strong motivation to ensure his silence. The timing of their departure and the Deloqua family's disappearance just 15 days later suggests a connection. The murdered secretary and manager may have been eliminated as witnesses. The finger bones found in the hidden room point to a violent conclusion. In 1968, French police records documented the arrival in Paris of Villars and companion Eleanora Reynolds using funds from a substantial bank draft. They lived quietly in France before relocating to England in 1847. English census records from 1851 list Louis and Eleanora Villars residing in London, with Eleanora described as wife. They had 2 children and remained in England until at least 1861, after which they disappear from public records. As for the Deloqua family, no trace was ever found. Their abandoned house acquired a reputation as one of the most haunted properties in a city of ghosts. Local legend held that on certain nights, particularly during Carnival, the sounds of a struggle could be heard from within, followed by a woman's triumphant laughter. The case of Eleanora Reynolds represents a documented collision between the brutal economics of slavery and Louisiana's complex racial laws, a chain of events culminating in disappearances and likely murders. It is a stark reminder of a society where freedom and identity hinged on ancestry and appearance. The portrait of the Pearl now hangs in the historic New Orleans collection, a silent testament to a woman who refused to accept her designed fate. Her journal is an important source for historians. The final entry in the museum catalogue offers a fitting epitaph: "Remember her not for her beauty, which was remarkable, nor for her suffering, which was immense, but for her determination to exist on her own terms in a world that offered her no place. In this, she achieved what few can claim: she wrote herself into being." In 1969, during further renovations, workers discovered a small cavity beneath the floorboards of the hidden room. Inside was a gold locket containing a miniature painting of a ship at sea. Engraved on the back were the initials JV and MR. Jean Villars and Marie Reynolds, and the date February 20, 1816, 9 months before Eleanora's birth. The locket, like Eleanora herself, had traversed the boundaries between worlds. It now resides alongside her portrait, 2 artifacts from a story that continues to haunt a city built on secrets. The hidden room is preserved as part of the building's historical restoration. Tour guides speak of the mysterious woman sold at the St. Louis Hotel, her connection to a prominent family, and her escape. What they cannot tell is what happened to those who sought to keep her enslaved. Like the darkest chapters of American history, some truths remain buried beneath time, silence, and complicity. In a city built on unstable ground, where the dead rest in above-ground tombs, some secrets inevitably rise. Others remain submerged, known only through fragments and whispers, like distant laughter carried on the warm night air of the French Quarter. In 1958, an elderly woman named Margaret Wilson arrived in New Orleans, claiming to be Eleanora's great-granddaughter. She carried letters reportedly written by Eleanora from London, describing her marriage to Louis and a life of comfort. One letter, dated October 1867, made cryptic reference to the Deloqua's fate: "I am still haunted by what Elle felt compelled to arrange that February night. I cannot reconcile myself to the thought of the children. Elle assures me they were sent away beforehand, but I have no way to verify this." Margaret Wilson died suddenly before the letters could be authenticated. They subsequently vanished. Then, in 1976, a researcher uncovered shipping records from March 1842 documenting 3 children traveling unaccompanied to Havana under the surname Reynolds. Their ages matched the Deloqua offspring. Their guardian was listed as Martha Bernard, the same servant from Beau Refuge. This discovery suggested the children had been spared. Cuban records showed no further trace of them. In the summer of 1981, a severe drought exposed a grim discovery in the Mississippi near Beau Refuge, a flatboat containing the remains of a man, woman, and 2 adult males, all killed by gunshots to the head. Personal effects included a watch-engraved CD and a locket with a portrait of 3 children resembling the young Deloqua heirs. This provided compelling evidence that Charles, Isabel, and their 2 associates had been executed and weighted down in the river. In 1994, the final piece emerged, a sealed confession signed by Louis Villars, dated February 25, 1842. It read, "What I have set in motion cannot be undone. The elimination of Charles and Isabel Deloqua has become necessary for ease, safety, and freedom. I have arranged for the children to be taken to Cuba. E insisted on this mercy. The men I have engaged are reliable and well compensated. The bodies will never be found. I record this truth to ensure there exists one account of what truly occurred and why it was necessary. The confession was authenticated. It settled the question of responsibility, revealing Louis as the architect of the killings, while highlighting the moral complexity of a society that offered Eleanora no legal recourse. In 2002, DNA testing confirmed a biological relationship between remains from a London cemetery, where an Eleanora Villars was buried in 1872, and the finger bones from the hidden room, suggesting they likely belonged to Charles Deloqua, a gruesome trophy. Eleanora died at 55, having lived more than half her life free. Louis outlived her by 6 years. Their children married into English families, their mother's history apparently unknown. The Deloqua children vanished into history, casualties of a system that valued human beings as property. Their disappearance represents another cost of America's peculiar institution. Eleanora's story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Born to a free woman and a disinherited son, she navigated racial classification, enslavement, and violent liberation. Her journey from auction block to London drawing rooms encompassed the full spectrum of experiences for a woman of mixed heritage in the 19th century. Today, her portrait, the hidden painting, and the gold locket are on display. They tell only part of the story. The rest exists in silences, in the absence of the Deloqua family, the unknown fate of their children, and the moral ambiguities of violence committed when legal justice is denied. Descendants of the Villars family have since established a scholarship in Eleanora's honor, accompanied by a formal acknowledgement of her place in their lineage. It is a small step toward reconciling with a history that continues to shape America. The former Deloqua mansion now operates as a historic hotel. Guests report unusual phenomena, footsteps, moved items, a feeling of being watched near the hidden room. Whether these are spirits or the power of suggestion, the walls absorb the suffering of a woman who refused to accept the identity forced upon her. Eleanora's journal ends with her plans for escape. But her story continued long after. She transformed herself from property to person, from captive to free woman, from victim to perhaps even avenger. She embodied the fundamental contradiction of American slavery, the persistent, undeniable humanity of those the system tried to reduce to commodities. The mystery of the pearl is not merely a tale of auction blocks and hidden rooms. It is the story of a woman who insisted on writing her own narrative in a time and place determined to write it for her. That she succeeded, even at a terrible cost, stands as both inspiration and indictment. As night falls over the French Quarter, tour guides still point out the Deloqua house. Few recognize they walk over ground where people were bought and sold, or that beneath the Mississippi's surface may lie the bones of those who participated in that commerce. The river keeps its secrets. But occasionally, when waters recede or walls are opened, the truth emerges, demanding acknowledgement. In those moments, we glimpse not just the specific horrors endured by Eleanora Reynolds, but the larger horror of a society built on such relationships. Perhaps that is why her portrait draws visitors who stand in lengthy contemplation. In her amber eyes, one sees both suffering and determination. She gazes slightly past the viewer, toward something beyond our vision. What she sees there, judgment, redemption, or simply the next chapter, remains as mysterious as the woman herself. In 2019, advanced imaging technology confirmed that Eleanora herself had likely been the artist who painted over the original family portrait, creating her own image on top, an act of both concealment and reclamation, a palimpsest of identity that mirrored her complex journey. And so the story ends where it began, with an image of a woman whose extraordinary beauty belied an even more extraordinary spirit. The mystery may never be fully resolved, but in its outline, we see reflected the larger American mystery of race, identity, and the human capacity to both inflict and overcome injustice. As you leave this account, consider that the ground beneath your feet holds countless similar stories, never recorded, never discovered. For every Eleanora who left behind a journal, thousands of others disappeared without a trace. Their collective silence echoes on warm southern nights, in a city where beauty and cruelty have always existed in uncomfortable proximity. Listen closely, and you might hear them. The voices of those who, like Eleanora, refused to be merely what others declared them to be. Their whispers remind us that the past is never truly past, that justice delayed is often justice denied, and that the human spirit, once awakened to its own worth, cannot be contained by any system, no matter how entrenched or powerful.